Hi, this is Mike Hibbard back with another Python Django tutorial for you. As promised in the last tutorial, we're going to cover a little bit on how to extend forms and to actually start creating forms of your own. This is not going to be a full-blown forms tutorial, but it's going to give you the basic concepts of how forms work in Django, so that you can then ease yourself into the idea of how forms actually are a class within Python and not an HTML based layout that you put into your pages. It's an interesting idea that you can create an object within Python that knows how to actually create itself on a web page. So we're going to look at why you need to understand that, and in the process we're going to also extend the registration form that we built last time in our user registration tutorial. As you remember, or you might remember, we were able to record the password and also the username, but there were some of the pieces of information missing. For instance, the email wasn't being recorded at the registration time, and you might find that also in other registration situations you might want to record lots of other types of information that aren't included in the basic user creation form that we used. So how do we go about extending that? Well, as with everything, we choose where to keep our code, and because this registration system is a site-wide kind of module, then we're going to keep our forms for this specific subject inside of our Django folder, so where we keep our project rather than actually where we're keeping our modules. So if I just open up my tree view, this gives us an idea of where all of that's kept. So we're talking about in the Django test project folder. If we were going to make forms, for instance, for our article module, we'd stick them inside of the articles or the article folder. We'd still probably call it the same file, because when you do forms you generally just call them forms.py. So whether this is in my project folder or whether it's in my article folder, I would make a forms.py here, and inside of there we do all our declarations for the forms. So I've created the file there, so I'm going to open it up in our Wing IDE, and we're going to add a few things in just to extend that. So just to remind you, we're currently using this user creation form, which is contained in Django contrib auth forms, which is part of that authentication module that we can import. We're going to extend this by basically inheriting that class and all its properties, but then adding an extra few bits and bobs for ourselves so we can start and save the email address. And this can easily be applied to the first name and last name information that you might have seen in the admin in our last tutorial also. But I'm just going to concentrate on how to do the email address, because first name and last name is very simple. It's just a text field, so you should be able to add that by yourself once you've gotten to grips with what this tutorial does. So what do we do first? First of all, we're going to say from Django bring in the forms framework. Then we're going to say from the authentication models bring in the user, because when we do our registration process we're going to fill in some of the user information and then save it. So we're going to override the way that this user creation form actually saves its information. So we need to get that user model so that we can start and create records and alter them. The next bit is to just bring in our user creation form so that we can actually inherit from it with our new class. And then I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to call it my registration form, and in the brackets we're going to say this form inherits from the user creation form that we've just pulled in from auth model, from Contrib auth forms. Now the next bit, we're going to start and declare what fields will be displayed in the form in the HTML. So this is a different concept to what you might be used to in other kinds of web development situations, where you would normally do, as we've done before, you just write your own form. You put your own fields in, and you name them, and you do it all in HTML. We don't have to do that with Django Forms, and that's why it's so useful and so helpful, because all of the processes that you would normally go through, like for instance doing the HTML to make the form, then actually parsing the information out of the form and then making sure that it's clean and safe from any kind of weird Django JavaScript injection or anything like that. This class will do all of that for you. So you basically just have to tell it what parts of the information you want to pull from the form. And the way that we do that is we define a field. So to define a field for our email that we're going to pull in, we basically go, here's a variable called email that equals one of these built-in types that is defined inside the forms module, email field. And we're going to say that it's required. So you can't fill in this form without this saying, if you don't put an email address in there, it's going to come back and say that's not a valid form. You need to fill in this field. The next thing we do is we add in this embedded class. I'm not sure what the exact term is for these, but this is a class that's defined within the scope of this form class that we've created, and it's simply to hold anything that isn't a form field. So anything from what the model is, what the fields are, what ordering you might have in other models or other model forms that you create. You can put all sorts of different attributes that would apply to the form inside of this class. And this is basically the metadata for the actual class itself, and this is more or less the way that Django tells this class it's got extra information other than the obvious declaration of form fields. So we've defined the form fields here, but then we've actually added an extra bit of information in just to say what the model is, and then obviously what fields we're going to contain. So user, email, password 1 and password 2. Okay, so next we now have to do a little bit of messing about with the save method. Now, just to give you the explanation of why, inside of our project that we created with virtual env, we installed Django, and it installed into this lib folder here under Python 2.7 for me, in site packages, Django, and go back into that Django folder there. This is when you're typing from Django import such and such, what it's really saying is from this Django folder here, import one of these available modules rather. So from Contrib auth import forms. So if we take a look at that in our editor, I'll just quickly open it up, and local Python site packages Django Contrib auth forms. If we use this nice little quick class selector drop down box, we can go to the user creation form, which will shoot us straight to wherever it is in the file. And you'll see there that it's quite a long bit of code, but we're not going to totally duplicate all of this. We're going to inherit most of this. The thing that we're really interested in is the save method that it has. So how this information gets saved by this form. So what you've got here is, first of all, it uses a super command, which is just to basically call the base class, and use this save method in this instance. So this will just basically go down and call the very basic Django form method. It brings back us a user, and then we have set password, blah blah blah, save it, and return a user. So this does very much all of the stuff, like, you know, checking for the valid username and seeing that it's not duplicated, and then setting the password based on what password one is after validation. Notice it uses this thing here called cleaned data. This is a dictionary of information that's created from the information that's passed through from the HTML form. Now, this information is what you would consider to be safe to be put into a database, because it's been through filters, it's been validated, it's been checked for, you know, all kinds of invalid characters, and then it's been put in this cleaned data area. So if you're going to pull anything out of the posted form, then it's better that you get it out of here than anywhere else, and at least you can be more or less sure that it's safe. So that's pretty much what the save method in the original one does. So what we're going to do is we're going to more or less copy that a little, but instead of doing the set password and the rest of it, we're just going to add in the extra bit to say save the email address. So we'll start off by just doing the same line as before, calling the super, so calling the subclass, which will be the user creation form, calling its save method, but telling it not to commit the data. You remember in our databases tutorial for Django, we looked at how, you know, you can create a user object or an article object, fill its fields in with information, but then to commit it you have to actually use the save method. So we're telling it not to save it right now because we haven't quite finished adding information to the user object. Now we add in our email to the user object, and we take it from the clean data area so that we know that it's been processed and that it's going to be safe for us to put into the database and not screw everything up. And then we're saying if this commit value equals true, which it would be in our case, but it wouldn't be in this case because we've sent it through to the other form. And the reason why we do that is because if we then decide at a later date to then inherit from my registration form, we've got this with the basic setting of save straight away, and if we ever want to override it, we'll just say false. So it just follows the convention that we automatically save unless we want to specify not to. So we save in, and then we return the user object in the same way as the old form does, because I'm sure that probably gets passed on to something else to get manipulated or recorded by another part of the framework. So we will not break with convention, and that will keep that user there. So that's that. So that's basically how we've overridden the functionality of the user creation form. The only thing we've really got next to do is to switch over and stop using the old user creation form in our view. So to do that, we're going to go from forms, which is our forms file, import my registration form instead. Okay, and then if we go down to our register user view, we're going to switch over from using the user creation form. So we're going to make one there which goes into the empty unposted form, and then we're going to create another one here which goes into our posted form with the post information passed through to it. And then obviously the form validation is exactly the same because we've just basically inherited everything from the original base class. So all we need to do is say, if it's a valid form, save it, and then redirect to our registration success, which is exactly what we did in the last tutorial, but now we're going to do it with our new customized form, which should allow us to save the email address. We could also, if we wanted to and if we had time, we could then, if we wanted to, add in more fields for the first name and surname or second name. But if you want to go ahead and do that as an exercise, feel free. It shouldn't take you 2 seconds. In fact, you can more or less just stick them in underneath here, saying user dot first name etc. equals cleaned data, and as long as you added in the extra form field up here, then it should all work. So let's give it a try, just to see it in action. Okay, then here we go. There. So not very well formatted, obviously, because I haven't really applied any CSS or anything like that to the page, but here we go. Test user, and I think it's me at website.com. I'm just going to put in that there. You have successfully registered. Okay, so if we go into our admin, let's just see whether that's recorded our email address in addition to the password and username. And here we can see that it has. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. The form itself doesn't necessarily have to be changed in your templates, it just needs to be changed at the code level, which means that any code updates would automatically update any HTML forms that you have on your website. This makes it way more maintainable than if you had to go and change the code and then you had to go and change your HTML. So it saves a lot of worry for you in that. So that's basically it. That's how you do that sort of thing. I'm hoping that this was informative to you and it helped you out. If it did, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more in the series, and next time it will be how to make your own custom forms for your own custom models, and we'll take that a step further. Then if you want to know more about that or any of the other subjects that we'll cover in the future, then please click the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.